Planning the management of your research data means that you consider what decisions you will need to make and what actions you will need to take in order to work with your data in a responsible way before, during, and after your research project. A tool to help you systematically think about data management is a Data Management Plan, or DMP. A DMP is a paper or electronic document with questions that help you describe your data and how you will work with them. There are multiple reasons why you should write a data management plan. It is a good way to get an overview of the steps to be taken in your project. It will urge you to make data management decisions before they could potentially become a problem, so that your project will run more smoothly. You can use it to make strategic decisions, for example, when deciding on a data publication strategy. A data management plan is also a great tool to align expectations and procedures when working with collaborators.
My PhD project is about grammatical anomalies, or grammatical errors, as you can call them, in Danish as a second language. Setting up a data management plan has helped me to be sure that I have considered all of the different issues concerning my data, especially because I'm working with a lot of different types of data, and also I have data with personal information.
So in our project, Broken Grammar and Beyond, we share data and communicate with different collaborators. So we work with the Danish Language Council, we work with different language schools, and we also work with psycholinguistic labs in Denmark and out of Denmark. So it's quite a complex infrastructure, and as a PhD student, Katrine has to navigate in this complex environment. And with the data management plan, she's much better equipped to plan the different steps in the data management and to also see how her individual project fits into the grander scheme of the overall project.
Another reason for writing a data management plan is that others may want you to do so. More and more funders require DMPs. Some will want you to submit one after you have received funding. Others will require a DMP as part of your funding proposal. This means that your funding success may be influenced by the data management plan you submit. Besides funders, your institution may also request you to write a data management plan. It is a good idea to check local data management policies to see if this is the case. You typically write a data management plan before you start working with data, and you update it during your project. You can write your own plan and address the topics that you deem important for your project, or you can use an existing template, for example, one that is available at your university. If you're applying for funding, you should check whether the funder offers a template. If so, you should use that one to be sure that you provide the information that the funder is interested in. Let's have a closer look at data management plans. Some plans focus on specific topics, such as data sharing. Other DMPs cover more topics and can be structured according to the research data lifecycle. There will, for example, be questions about collecting, processing, sharing, and preserving data. We will now introduce you to some of the many possible questions you can find in a data management plan and show you examples of how you could answer them so you can begin preparing your own DMP. All DMPs will contain questions to describe your data, such as what type of data will be collected.
I work with essays from students from a language school. And then I also have some questionnaires with background information from these students. And then later on I'm gonna make some reading experiments where I get some reading times and data from that.
We aim at understanding the molecular mechanism underlying cardiac arrhythmia. That means understanding why your heart sometimes doesn't beat like it should. And in order to do so, we use a wide array of methods, meaning that we also get really different types of data. That could be pictures, that could be movies, that could be sequences like that, DNA sequences, that could be all kinds of omics, that means genomics, like looking at the whole genome, at the whole proteome, Excel sheets, simple and very complicated formats, everything in a big box.
Thinking about the type of data in your project is very important. There may be some special considerations you need to take into account, depending on the material and data you work with. This could be the case if your research involves personal data, samples that you obtain from animals, or data that are confidential because they contain competitive information. Therefore, answers written in data management plans can differ a lot from one research discipline to another. There are many ways to describe a data set, and when you write your DMP, you will have to consider questions like: which file formats will your data sets be stored in? What is the expected volume of the data? What is your strategy for naming files and folders? File formats are important to consider. From the perspective of data reuse, it is best if you use formats that are widely accepted in your research discipline. Thinking about data volume beforehand is a good idea, so that you can decide on the most appropriate storage location for your data. Having a good strategy for naming files and folders will help you keep apart old and new versions of your data, so you are always sure that you're working on the right file. Many DMPs will also ask you to describe what you will need to arrange before you can start the project. For example, are there any ethical approvals that you need to obtain or legal obligations to fulfill before you start your research project? This question is particularly relevant for researchers working with personal data obtained from human material, patients, or registries.
At the Copenhagen Center for Glycomics, we study the function of glycans, carbohydrates, sugar molecules in human health and disease. Most of our work deals with cells in culture, but sometimes we use animal models and human biopsies. And before such projects can start, we need to obtain ethical approval of experiments and collect informed consent declarations from any participants in the project.
Catherine's answer to the question could be: in order to work with mice, I have had to obtain ethical approval from the Danish Animal Experiments Inspectorate. For the project involving human biopsies, I have obtained approval from the National Committee on Health Research Ethics. All participants have provided informed consent to ensure that they understand how their tissues and samples will be used. Some researchers do not produce their own data, but instead reuse data provided by others. Such data could come from public institutions, companies, public registries, or commercial data providers. In this case, you need to consider the rights and obligations concerning the data that you are planning to use. To do so, you must investigate the usage rights.
I think it is extremely important to clarify your rights and obligations at the very beginning of your research project. Generally, I will say that it is allowed to use commercial data for academic use. However, some data providers impose strict limitations, for example, regarding the data volume you are allowed to extract from databases. Well, the usage rights and obligations are captured in the license agreement. Just to show an example, here we have the database called Orbis, which is a company database with a lot of data on companies from all over the world. And here you can see you have a very short description of the license agreement in very general terms. So my recommendation is that the researchers contact the database specialist or the research data management support at the university or in the library to get help understanding their rights as data users.
Let's return to our DMP and answer this question. Are you aware of the rights and obligations concerning the data that you are planning to use? If you work with commercial databases, your answer could look like this. The data analyzed in this project are obtained from the commercial database Orbis. The Orbis license agreement explicitly prevents us from sharing the raw data after the project ends. Besides describing the research data and material you will work with, a proper description of your methods is crucial. In the future, it will help you understand how you carried out your project. Typical questions in a DMP could be, what will you do to document the data? And how will you make sure your data are understandable to others?
In our labs, one of the challenges is that there are several people working on one project. So while we save data on a shared server, the metadata, the description of the data sets, those often end in different lab books, and we're talking physical lab books. We're not just talking electronic data. So I try to implement a standardized form of metadata where we at least write the project title, who are the principal supervisors or investigators, who are the co-workers, give a little bit of background here and tell about the material and the methods used, and give some comments if necessary. This sounds like a no-brainer, but I also find that it is really challenging to get the people to use this consequently. And this is a prerequisite for that we can find the description of how a dataset was generated later on.
Metadata is data about your research data. Examples of metadata are keywords, title, creator, file version, format, and terms of use. You should always consider what metadata and documentation are needed to understand the data set now and later by you and by others. An answer that Nicole can give to the questions on how to document the data and how to make sure others can understand the data could be: I will create a README file for every data set in which I will record the project title, a short description of the project objectives, the materials and procedures used, and the researchers involved. The README file will be permanently associated with the data file. While working on your research project, you will have to store your active data, back it up frequently, and make sure that unauthorized persons cannot access the data. The strategy you choose may depend on the data type you work with. Questions regarding data storage could be: what is your strategy for the storage of research data, including backups? And how will you ensure data security?
We ensure data security by having all of the data with the personal information on a secure university drive, which means that you have to use a password to access it, and also all activity in that drive is locked. And then the papers containing personal information we have in a locked cabinet in our offices. We back our data up on another university drive, actually 2 other university drives. And then personally, my notes and things without personal information, I have a cloud drive where I back them up as well.
Catherine's answer could be: we store our data on a university drive that requires a password to access and that automatically logs all activities. We back up these data to our personal, password-protected university drive. It's always a good idea to check your university's guidelines on data storage and security and find out what software tools and support the university has to offer. When you're done analyzing your data and have generated results, you may think about sharing your data with others, for example, peers in your research community. Sharing your data is a good idea, as it can improve the visibility of your own research, as well as the transparency and reproducibility in your field of research. Typical questions about data sharing are: which data will be shared and how can others find and reuse them?
We had recently a situation where we published a paper, but there were many supportive data, supplementary data, that the publisher wanted us to also submit along with a paper, and they suggested a repository where we could put it on. So that means when you look at our publication, then there's a link to the supportive material, and when you do that, you end on a repository like Figshare, where you then can go in and see at all the content, at all the pictures, at everything. And this made me very much aware of such a repository. That would mean that I could also use it for other data sets in other projects, where I can get an identifier, a unique identifier for this data set, so I can be cited for that. I can put licenses to it, so people could know when, under which conditions they could use it. And the cool thing with that is that they store it for 10 years. That means that it also complies with the policies that are around and the requirements. And even better, I recently learned that my own university is offering such a service, which is basically an added value for any researcher.
Nicole's answer for this question could be, as a minimum, I will preserve all datasets underlying publications for 10 years. I will select a data repository where I can add metadata, a unique and persistent identifier, for example a DOI, and a license to my datasets, so they can be discovered and cited by others, and the terms for reuse are clear. Nicole's example shows that you can use a data repository to share your data with others. In some cases, you can't share your data openly. However, it may still be possible for you to share data with individual researchers upon request. Either way, you should ensure that the data you share can be correctly interpreted by others. When you have completed your project, you shouldn't just leave your data and move on to the next project or job. Instead, you should take action to preserve your data for a long period of time, possibly decades. So you need to consider which data will be preserved. To answer this question, you should investigate the value of your research data and only keep data that you deem of high value. This includes all data underlying publications. Preserving these data will, for example, enable you to defend yourself against challenges raised in connection to your published work. You may also want to preserve data that are difficult or costly to collect, and data that are impossible to reproduce. Examples are data generated or processed by a company you hired, weather data, and data collected from rare animals or remote areas. You also need to consider which data will be destroyed. This could be the case for biological material that will deteriorate over time. Confidential data or personal data that cannot be anonymized may also need to be destructed.
When a project ends, then I delete early versions of manuscripts. So that is summary of data, if you want to say so. But if I can, I would really like to keep it as long as possible, because you never know what it can be used for. So recently I found that some data I got in 2003 all of a sudden becomes relevant for a project right now that at that time even didn't know that it would be happen. So good that I could find it again, all the data. And I would of course delete everything that has to do with person-sensitive data, but I'm not working with that. But I would also like to take raw data from material that easily deteriorates, where we would have to use new animals. If I can keep the data for as long as possible and by that not have to use more animals in experiments, that is of course also very important.
Finally, you must consider for how long you will preserve your research data. If there are no other legal requirements regulating the preservation period for your data, you should follow the Danish Code of Conduct for Research Integrity's demand to preserve data underlying publications for a minimum of 5 years. You should consider doing the same for data that may never get published. When deciding on a preservation strategy, it is a good idea to check the rules and regulations governing your type of data, as well as guidelines at your institution or research group to determine which data to preserve, how and for how long. You have now seen examples of questions you can expect in a data management plan and examples of how you could answer them. There are tools that can help you write a data management plan. One such tool is DMP Online, provided by the Danish E-Infrastructure Corporation and available under dmponline.deic.dk. DMP Online is free to use, and Danish researchers can log in with their institutional credentials after signing up. Once logged in, your dashboard will show the DMPs that you have previously created. When you create a new plan, you can choose between different DMP templates, for example, one provided by the research funder you would like to submit a research proposal to. There is guidance available to help you fill in the DMP. You can select guidance prepared by your university or another organization, such as the Digital Curation Centre in the UK, which is an organization with expertise in research data management. You can now start filling in the text fields corresponding to the different questions in the DMP. On the right-hand side, you can find the guidance that you have selected. You can save your progress and continue later. You can share your DMP with collaborators so that you can plan and work on the document together. Once you're done, you can simply download it in your preferred format. Using some formats, you can do some further editing if you want. When you're done, you can submit it to your funding agency or research administration. If you would like some examples of how data management plans are written, you can search for existing DMPs online. You can of course also ask the research data support at your institution to review your data management plan. They will have experience working with DMPs and will be able to help you on your way. You have reached the end of this module. You now know what a data management plan is. You are familiar with the types of questions that a DMP can ask you. You have an idea of how to answer those questions. And you hopefully see that a data management plan can be a valuable tool in your future research projects. Good luck!